Welcome back to the TQS classroom. We're working on a fabric embellishing class, and we're doing this this fabulous little quilt. Today, we're going to add raw edge applique shapes to our quilt to give us a little bit more opportunity for embellishment for the lessons to follow. So if you've never fused for raw edge applique, I'm just going to go over that real quickly. In your downloadable pattern for this week, we are going to work on every single block on here except for the sky. We'll save the sky for next week. And I've named each of the blocks according to what's eventually going to go on there. So for example, this is our heart flower block, and it has the shapes of the appliques that we're going to do in lesson 1 in one column. It also has a few shapes in a different column for lesson 3. We'll just save those for lesson 3 and don't worry about those for this week. So all you're going to do, I've got a light box over here that I'm going to turn on to trace my pattern. You've also got a layout. I'll set that aside because that'll tell us where we're going to lay our appliques once we've got the fusible on them. I'm going to lay my pattern on my light box. I'm just going to do the heart for an example. What I've got here is some Heat and Bond Light. It's a fusible that I like. You want to make sure that your fusible is made for stitching, for sewing in, because some of them have so much glue that it gums up your needle. They're not intended to sew on top of. So just make sure you've got a fusible that's intended for sewing. Your Heat and Bond has a paper side and then a rough glue side. You want to make sure that your glue side is down. Lay it down on the pattern that you want to trace, and then trace around your shape. If you don't have a light box, just tape it to your window or you use a sliding glass door. Honestly, when I'm not taping this for the classroom, that's easier for me than digging out the light box. Okay, so I've got my shape drawn onto my Heat and Bond Light. I want to pick out my fabric scrap that I'm going to use for this heart shape. Now, I've got a solid here, so there's not a wrong side or a right side. If there was, I want the wrong side facing me. And then I'm going to put my glue from my shape down, touching the wrong side of my fabric. I'm just going to give you a little tip for embellishment. If you use solid fabrics or nearly solid fabrics, your embellishments will show up a lot better. They'll kind of take center stage. So here I've used a solid pink. And I just want to remind you that at the beginning of this project, if you're using multiple kinds of fabric in your quilt, we've set our iron at a silk setting. It's okay, even though this is a cotton piece. So I'm going to lay down my iron and press for a few seconds, pick it up and move it, and press again until I've gotten my Heat and Bond to adhere all the way around my piece. Now, through the magic of our little television set here, I've cut out around the line. It's fused on here, and I've cut out around my heart. So give it a good bend and release the paper. Now you've got this heart shape that has this shiny glue on it. This is what you're going to fuse onto your quilt. So be sure and use your pattern so that you know where exactly you want this heart on your block. Aim your heart shiny side down, because that's the glue, and then fuse it again. The same way you put the paper on it, you're now going to fuse it to the quilt. Okay. That's my little dog Charlie. He must be excited that there's someone at the door. Anyway, I've fused a simple leaf shape onto the quilt here, just because I want to show you how I tie the threads on and off, tie the threads off once I've stitched it down. So a couple of things to keep in mind when you're stitching around your shape. I've gone in about 1/8 of an inch, just whatever's comfortable for you. You're gonna stitch the shape down, and then it's called raw edge applique because you're just leaving the raw edge. So a couple of things that I've done with my machine before I start stitching is I select the needle down position, which basically just means when you stop sewing, your needle's going to be down into your work, and you can pivot then on that needle when you're changing position. Then I also reduce my stitch length from a 2.5 to a 2.0. These tails that are on here are where I started and stopped. It's important to leave your tails. So I start stitching here. I go all the way around my shape, stop when I'm going to change position, pivot, stitch around the rest of the shape, and I'm going to stop in the exact same place where I started, leaving a tail. Now what I've got here is just a size 6 embroidery needle, just a standard hand stitching needle. I'm going to take my tail threads and thread them into my needle. I thread them in both at the same time. It doesn't matter, you can thread them one at a time. It's just faster for me to do them both all at once. I'm going to put this needle right through that stitch where I started and stopped and pull these tails to the wrong side. So now in the green, I've got my stitches from the top, and my bobbin threads are in the cream right here. So I've got 2 top threads, 2 bobbin threads, and I'm simply going to tie a square knot with all 4 threads. And a square knot has 2 steps. 1, and go through the loop 2, tie it nice and snug, and then when I clip off, I go ahead and leave about 1/2 inch tails. Those are going to be buried in the body of your quilt. No one will see them. But if you leave some long tails, then there's no way for them to wiggle out and become untied. So you're going to want to download your pattern. Make sure that you cut out all of the shapes for all of the blocks, which is going to be all of them except this top one, which is the sky, like I mentioned. And well, let me just back up and talk about the message block. This block here is what I'm calling the message block. On my sampler, it says quilting equals. On a lot of my projects, I'll put words, and people ask me all the time, how do you do the words on your projects? Here's a sample that I've got that is my notebook, and it has my name on it. It has a little monogram, it has kind of a large monogrammed L, and then it has my name, Lauren. And people ask me all the time, how do you do the words? Well, they're really not a lot different than any simple shape. It's just a lot more tedious. It's a lot more complex shape. So I'm going to tell you how to do the message that I have on the sampler quilt, quilting equals. But as I explain it to you, if you decide you want to use another word, please feel free to do so. That's your design decision. And you may want to do something a little more simple as a first round for these words. So I'm going to pull out my pattern. That's what you're going to be able to download as a pattern for this week, and it says quilting equals. This is a font out of my computer. I have a thing for fonts, so I buy scrapbooking fonts all the time. This is called Sassy, and it's at 180 point, which you probably don't have on your computer, but that's okay. If you want to do quilting equals the exact same way I did, you'll have it in your downloadable PDF. It'll look like this. I'm going to turn my light box on again. Now, one thing to remember when you're doing words, there's a right side to the words. You don't want to make your words so that it reads backwards or reads like the mirror image. So when you're doing the words, instead of having them facing the right way up like you did your shapes, you want to make sure that you're tracing your word backwards. Just think of it as what I'm tracing it onto my fusible is the backing, so I want to trace it backwards. So I've got another piece of Heat and Bond light here. And I'm going to lay it down on top of my word, which is backwards. And if you noticed on my quilt, I smash all of the letters together. I do that so that my word is one piece. It's a complex piece, but it's only one piece. If you want to do each letter separately, that's perfectly fine. Just keep in mind that's going to be a lot of tying off. I don't particularly love tying off, so I smash my words together when I'm tracing them. So I would trace around the Q on my light box. And then I'm going to scoot it over and smash it into the U so that it's touching in a couple of spots, and then trace my U. And then scoot it over and smash it into the I. And I go ahead and do that for the entire word until it's smashed together. And then as I showed you with the heart, I fuse the Heat and Bond onto the back of my fabric and then cut it out. And it's very painstaking. I'm not gonna I'm not going to lie, the words are a little bit persnickety and tedious. However, everyone loves them. They think it's like the greatest thing. So it's kind of worth it. It's a labor of love. So here I've got my quilting, my little equal sign, and they're cut out with the fusible on the back. So then I can apply this with the iron to my message block and stitch around it. Here you're going to love your needle down because there's a lot of little nooks and crannies that you're going to change position on. So if you want to do a different message, let's just say you'd love to have this quilt say your name on it, then print out on your computer your name in a font that you like. I always run it through the computer and then, you know, sort of look at it for size, because different fonts, even if they're the same point size, will be a different size. Or if this is the first time you've ever tried a shape quite this complex, you just might want your message to be joy, J-O-Y. They're 3 basic letters. It's a lot easier to stitch around, but it's up to you. If you're up to the challenge, do the quilting equals. It looks really cool. But if you want a simpler message, that's your design decision. Go ahead and do a simpler message. Okay. Now, there's one last thing that I want to show you for today that has to do with text on your quilt. I've got some samples over here of some ribbons that I've printed specific words on. The top sample says Lauren's Stitch Journey, and it's on an orange silk ribbon. And then this other sample is just my thread sampler, and I labeled each of the threads that I used so that I'd have it as a reference. And people ask me all the time, well, how do you get, you know, the word metallic or dazzle or hologram? You're not going to find at the scrapbook store. So this is a super cool, really easy trick that I'm going to show you so that you can print the word that you want onto the ribbon or twill tape that you want, in the font that you want. You can even make it the color that you want. What more could you want? Okay, super simple trick. Once I show it to you, you're going to be printing on all kinds of ribbon. All right, what you're going to need is your pattern that you've downloaded. This is the word love. It's in Twilight, and it's 100 point. This is in your pattern. As you download it, this is exactly how, you know, when you print this page out, this is how it comes out. So if you were doing it from scratch, pick the word that you want and print it out on paper until it's the size that you want in the font that you want. So on this, go to your pattern and just pick the page, whichever page this love word is on all by itself, and just print it out. As it comes out of your printer, it will look like this on the paper. What you're going to do is take this piece of paper and put double stick tape. Now you know where the love is going to print on your page out your printer. So we're going to put double stick tape over the word. Okay. So I've covered the word with tape that's sticky on both sides. There's a couple of kinds of double stick tape. Don't use the temporary, it's not sticky enough. Use the just plain Jane Scotch permanent double-sided tape. And then you'll take your twill tape or your ribbon. This twill tape is included in the companion pack. Lay your twill tape over the word, because you know that's where it's going to print, and take it to your printer. Run it through your printer the same way that you ran it through the first time, and it comes out of your printer like this. Now the word, because the twill tape's in the way of the paper, has printed onto your twill tape rather than onto your paper. I'm just going to say real quick here, this is for inkjet printers. If you have a laser printer, it doesn't work quite like this. You want to do this on an inkjet printer. I could have picked a color for this message. I could have picked a different font. I could have picked a different kind of ribbon. It's just as simple as that. You can print out any word that you want. So for our quilt, we're going to peel this off, our twill tape. You can use this over and over. You could probably use it 4 or 5 times, this one sheet, and just keep printing on ribbons if you wanted to have a whole bunch of little ribbons that said love. We're going to set this aside, and we'll get to this towards the end of the classroom when we apply it on the quilt. So just keep that in your little bag of tricks and we'll apply it later. So I just want to recap for this lesson. You're going to be doing all of your raw edge applique pieces for lesson 1. Each page by page goes block by block. And then you'll be doing your message. You know, keep in mind the level of difficulty that you're comfortable with. If you want to do the quilting equals, just be patient. It takes a little time to sew around that complex shape, but you can do it. Or pick a simpler word. Or if your design is telling you you'd rather have it say welcome, then pick welcome. That's up to you. I can't wait to see these posted this week, the pictures. Raw edge applique shapes, and then printing on your twill tape. So when you've finished all of that, you'll be good to go for lesson number, I have to think for a minute, for lesson number 2. And for lesson number 2, we're going to attack that sky block that we sort of left alone this week. We're going to be doing some quilting with metallic threads, so stay tuned for that. I have some great tips for that. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.